Children, pay attention, please. Now, our free time is over, so we're going to put away our things and we're going to tell a nice story.
Welcome to Great Lives, and I wonder if you can guess which great lady we're going to be talking about today. I'll let our guest, Arabella Weir, tell us and tell us why. Arabella, who are we talking about?
Joyce Grenfell, of course.
And why?
She is the mother of female stand-ups, I guess. Well, she wasn't a stand-up comic, but she certainly was, in a way, for someone like me, a woman on her own on stage doing comedy. And I grew up in a country without a television, and we used to listen to those records all the time, and they made us howl with laughter. And we also had nannies, so the whole kind of nanny thing, and there's just that sort of restraint, the fury held back, the joke being that when she was talking to the kids... George, yes. I suppose it's got particular relevance for me because my parents enjoyed it as well. And, of course, there's not much that you have as a kid that your parents like too. So, my granny loved Joyce Grenfell as well, so it was very nice to listen to with different members of the family, which certainly didn't happen once we got a television.
Here she is back in the nursery as a nursery school teacher locked in eternal struggle with her charges.
Sydney, come out from under the table, dear, and join in the fun. Don't you want to help tell a nice story, Sydney? Then say no, thank you, and stop machine gunning people, please. George! Don't do that. What are we going to tell our story about today? Rachel, take your shoe off your head, dear, and put it on your foot. About a dear little bunny rabbit. All right, Peggy, that's a good idea, we will. He lived in a burrow, and who did he live there with? His mummy bunny rabbit, yes, and his daddy bunny rabbit. Wasn't that nice? Yes, it was, Sydney.
Arabella.
It's the things she doesn't say that make you laugh. And that's such clever work. It's the timing, and you can hear she's right up against it in terms of her patience, but she's really trying, and it's that you can hear it all in the voice and the tension and the timing. It's just beautiful, and what's making you laugh is, that's great, super. All that kind of, when I just always love that in comedy, when people are saying one thing, but clearly everything they mean is something entirely different. So I think that's very cleverly worked.
Arabella Weir, my guest, is a comic performer and writer. She's also an author, and most famous for coining the phrase, "Does my bum look big in this?" Also the title of her best-selling novel. And we're fortunate to be joined here in the studio by Joyce's friend and biographer, Janie Hampton. She's probably best known, I suppose, for her monologues, but what's not so well known is that she wrote everything she performed. She was a writer first and an entertainer second, and her most striking gift was for observation. Like Jane Austen, she wrote only from her own experience. Joyce composed and wrote over 100 different personalities. Not bad for a woman who described herself as about 8 feet tall, with a face like a reflection in a spoon. Did she really look like that, Janie?
She was a very tall woman, and as a child I was always struck by the fact that there weren't many women of her age who wore makeup in the same way she did. That was the only thing that gave her away as a theatrical. But she wasn't the sort of woman you'd sit on the knee of. She was more like a rather proper great-aunt.
So you knew her and the family from quite early on?
My mother first met Joyce when she was pregnant with me and went to interview her for the Girls' Friendly Society magazine. And
sounds like a character in itself.
Joyce took on our family of 5 children after my father died, and she would invite us for Christmases, and she would send us trunks of her old clothes, which included her amazing Victor Steeble theatrical gowns of sort of 20 yards of jewel-coloured silk, which I'm afraid we cut up into miniskirts.
Oh.
What would you say was her most striking ability?
I think it was the ability to watch a person and work out their entire life and then describe it in a 2-minute monologue. And this often took her 2 or 3 years working away in her mind. And she said she couldn't write a monologue about somebody until she knew exactly what their bedroom looked like.
Oh, wow.
Did you realise, Arabella, that she put so much work and time into actually composing these monologues?
No, I didn't know, although it doesn't surprise me either, that she wrote all her own stuff. But it's so particular, and she really carved that out for herself. I suppose it's not that much of a surprise, but it's interesting to hear that she needed to know so much about the person's life, because of course that's what method actors talk about all the time, and to the rest of us seems hilarious. But the idea that, because if you're going to give an accurate picture that the audience will be able to identify with in a very short space of time, of course you need much more information than you're going to impart.
Well, I've often thought that if Joyce hadn't acted her monologues, if they'd simply been published as short stories, she would have the same reputation as Catherine Mansfield or Jane Austen. But because she acted them and people laughed at her, they forgot that she'd written them herself.
Let's eavesdrop, as Joyce herself loved to do, on two people, two very different characters.
He's got lovely manners. He says, "May I be permitted to divest you of your plastic Mac?" And then he admires my pastel blue 30s layer look and my hairdo and that, and we orders a nice tea, and it comes. And then all of a sudden he leans across the table and he takes hold of my hand and he says, "Has anyone ever told you you got provocative eyes?" I see his cuff go in the beef salad, but I don't say nothing. "Oh, well, my name is now Clinch. I married a man called Keith Clinch, and we've been living out in Kenya." "Yes, I am, by way of going into the tea." "What fun. Are you going?" "Oh, well, let's foregather." "What fun, Patsy. I should absolutely love that."
That's great.
Is it less comfortable today listening to her doing working-class accents?
Yes, I have to say, I was thinking she'd never be able to do that now, because this is no disrespect to her, but now it's impossible not to hear some sort of condescension. Whether it's intended or not, that you're hearing a better educated person, as it were, slightly kind of looking down. I mean, it's very funny, but you couldn't do it now. And probably rightly you couldn't do it now, because, of course, there's plenty of working class comics who can do their own. I mean, it's still lovely listening to her do that, but it does make you feel slightly uncomfortable now.
What was her family background?
Her family background was well-to-do without titles. So they owned big houses. Her aunt was Nancy Astor, the first woman to take a place in the House of Parliament. Her mother was the youngest of Nancy Astor's family, and they entertained each other the whole time. Her mother taught her a game of watching people out of the window and giving them voices.
So Joyce Grenfell's mother was American?
Yes.
And her father?
Her father was half American. So Joyce was actually 3/4 American.
And yet we think of her as so archetypally English.
But, so was she born in this country or in America?
She was born in this country. By the time she was 5, she'd been across the Atlantic half a dozen times. Oh. So she was a truly transatlantic child. She was always the poor relation. She got
to the Astors.
To the Astors. She got the cast-off clothes. But she was a Deb. She came out and was presented at court.
She may sound awfully grand to us now, but when she was asked to perform for the Queen and the Queen's guests at Windsor Castle during Ascot Week, she wrote in her diary, "Not my favourite audience, horsey, social upper crust and not all that bright." And she was all that bright. I mean, there's something which comes across immediately to me from all her work is her penetrating intelligence.
Yes, she's clearly very perceptive.
Also, although she left school at 15, she spent her whole life trying to make up for it.
You too, Arabella, were born abroad.
Yeah, in America.
I wonder whether coming to England, in one sense anyway, from the outside, makes you an observer, and a sharper-eyed observer than you could ever be if you were entirely part of it.
Oh, that's an interesting theory. My analysis of why I'm good, if I am, at observing other people and doing characters is because my dad was a diplomat. We changed schools every kind of couple of years, so you were always having to hit the ground running, and the best way to make sure you're popular at school is to be a clown. That's why I kind of learnt to pick up on things very quickly.
Were you
because
a nice girl, Arabella? Were you
No,
popular?
I was a horrible girl. I was very popular at school. I was the most popular girl
Why
at
were
school,
you horrible
but not
then?
with my teachers. Because I was so naughty. I was incredibly naughty, and my entire day was coloured by how much I could irritate a teacher, whether I could be sent out. You know, it was always just short of expelled.
Winding people up.
Winding people up, yeah. Well, making people laugh. It wasn't about annoying people, it was about making them laugh. And obviously you've got to take some prisoners when you do that.
I think that Joyce was similar to you in that she had to make people laugh because she was a big girl. She had the largest feet in the school and she was a sort of gawky character. So she was never going to get the boys for her looks.
No.
But she was terribly good with a capital G.
Yes.
She became,
Really?
yes. I mean, she was good up even before she became a Christian Scientist, which was when she was about 14.
And what was that? Was that her family became Christian Scientists?
Nancy Astor had been converted, and then she converted Joyce's parents. And certainly the way that Joyce embraced Christian Science was in a very black and white, good and evil way.
Well, that's the point of it, isn't it?
And this suited Joyce down to the ground because her mother was not terribly good. She was a bit of a bolter. And Joyce was determined to not be like her mother. And she decided that she would marry Reggie, who was absolutely delightful, the perfect husband. He had a big grin, he wasn't very handsome, he earned some money as an accountant, and he completely supported her. And whatever she did, Reggie said, go for it. And not many husbands would have said that in 1939.
On her return from her honeymoon, Joyce had a shock that was to affect her forever.
The breakup of my mother and father's marriage, I suppose, was the time I was most unhappy in my life. It came as a terrible shock. We came in late at night and found my father standing in the drawing room, and he said quite simply to me, your mother's gone away. And I really can't talk about it. It was such a moment of horror. But they did a most marvellous thing. They kept together and they made a happy family life for us to grow up in. We were unaware of this unhappiness, and it was a very profound unhappiness. And they denied themselves to give us that happy security. And I shall never cease to be grateful for that. That was the time when I first actually got a glimpse of confidence that man is a spiritual entity. Somehow this particular breakup where everything secure seemed to go and everything I had trusted seemed not to be there, at the same time I suddenly saw, almost with my eye, I suddenly saw this constant, unchanging, undeviating central core of good, which is always there, going on at all times. It's a law.
I'm not sure I agree with her on the last bit.
Did
but,
your parents have a happy
No, my
marriage?
parents split up as well, and that combined with changing schools. I can identify with that. I was much younger, but the, rocking your world, really shaking the foundations. I do remember really panicking on the way to school, thinking, what if the new people ask me if my parents are married? I will have to go through the embarrassment. It wasn't so much shame, because we were too sort of, I don't know what the word is, but too grand, I suppose, to worry about things like shame. But it was just the embarrassment. And then I thought, when everybody else will have securer backgrounds than me and that too much will be exposed. So I can really identify with that. And I'm surprised that at 19, well, she must have had a much, much happier childhood.
Interesting that the breakup of your parents' marriage, or the unhappiness of the marriage, did nothing to reinforce your belief in goodness, but in Joyce Grenfell's case, somehow this awful thing happening reinforced her belief in goodness. Did you know about this, Janie?
Yes, and that talk that she gave just now was the first time that she admitted to the world in public that she was a Christian Scientist. And she made a decision in 1971, having always kept very quiet about it. She had her home life with Reggie and going to church every Sunday, and then she had her work life, going on the stage, going on the radio, touring the world. And the two never met. And in those days, they didn't have to.
How did her career take off?
It all began when she went to a supper party at Stephen Potter's, who was one of the most brilliant radio producers in the 30s. He really sort of invented good radio. And she'd worked up this monologue. Well, she claimed that she'd just been to the Women's Institute meeting, which she did go to, and there was this woman giving a talk about making useful and acceptable gifts out of beech nut husk clusters. And everybody used to do a turn after supper, and some people would play the ukulele and some people would sing, and Joyce did this Women's Institute talk. And also there was a theatre producer called Herbert Farjan, and he heard her and said, "Who wrote that?" And she said, "Well, I wrote it." And he said, "Will you come in my review?" And she said, No, I'm a housewife. I go to the Women's Institute. I can't possibly do that." Anyway, he persuaded her, and she was so completely naive about the theatre. She said she could only come into his review if she only had to go to 2 weeks of rehearsals. She only rehearsed her bits. She didn't have to hang around and watch everybody else singing songs and doing high kicks. And she had to be allowed to only perform in the first half and the beginning of the second half because she had to get the 9 o'clock train back to Taplow. And Herbert Farjan was so determined to have her that he said yes.
Gosh, did your career take off so
It
easily,
was just
Arabella?
like that. No, my career took off thanks to Dame Edna. I did a tiny sketch with Barry, Dame Edna Everidge, but in a live show, and then in the second half I had to dry all the gladdy. But
So you started as a gladdy dryer?
As a gladdy dryer and a screamer. She clearly didn't have the kind of desperation that I had, because by the time I started in 1979, already, you know, you knew you were in a phenomenally competitive world where meritocracy doesn't always play a part. And so there would be no question of me having said, well, I can't do this and I won't do that. And, you know, most actors were literally going, you know, how do you want me?
I think it was just as competitive even in 1939. It's just Joyce didn't realise that. And she would.
Well, yes, because of course she wasn't trying to get. He wanted her.
She didn't need money, did she? You told us about Reggie's support for her career all her life, Janie. Did the marriage with Reggie go swimmingly right from the start?
Although Joyce and Reggie had a fantastically good marriage, which lasted 50 years, there was a little blip in the middle at the end of the Second World War when Joyce found herself in Cairo, having performed 3 concerts a day for 6 months, driving across the desert.
3 concerts a day? Oh, for the forces, right.
For the forces. It was really the Second World War that gave her career. And when she got to Cairo, she was absolutely exhausted. So she went to stay with her uncle, who happened to be the British ambassador. And
As was my dad.
And one of the guests who used to frequently come to the embassy parties was Prince Ali Khan, who was at the time married to a British aristocrat. But Prince Ali decided to make a go for Joyce. And he was famously good at seduction, which began with 6 dozen roses arriving at breakfast time, and he danced exquisitely, and he collected Picassos, and he played the piano, and he wooed her. And Joyce resisted and said, I don't like him, he's married, he's a Muslim, he's too rich, he drives too fast. But she was melting. And what happened at the end we will never know, because she told 3 of her friends, 2 of whom have since died and 1 won't tell me. But she certainly fell for him and felt very, very guilty.
This is almost the only thing we know about her that suggests she was susceptible to human temptations.
True.
She was, in other respects, an entirely good person. And I'm just wondering, Arabella, is it possible to be a comic and funny and virtuous and good at the same time?
No. I don't think comedy depends on cruelty, but it certainly depends on misfortune or mishap at the very least. So she may have pursued goodness, but she must have had some demon, as it were, inside her, driving her on. And she certainly wouldn't have gone on that long if she hadn't.
She certainly had a an incredibly powerful feeling that she had to be the centre of attention, which she'd had since she was a small child, and she wanted people to be looking at her and laughing at her.
She also had, though, the most extraordinary talent, and her career just took off from day one, didn't it, Janie?
I think it was sheer hard work. She liked to pretend it was the luck of going to Stephen Potter's supper party, but actually she worked really hard.
Here she is reading from her autobiography about how she created her characters.
I always knew the character I was after. The way into it came through the voice and accent. It was the voice that brought the character into focus, and with it, instinctively, came mannerisms and movements. I talked out loud to myself as I moved about our flat, thinking in the manner of the creature I was trying to bring to life. The storyline was the last to be thought about. Throughout the building-up process, anything from 2 days to a month, I made notes of key words and phrases, and so the piece took shape, and only then did I write it out in full. The second character appeared one night when I was cleaning my teeth. I looked in the mirror and curled back my upper lip to make sure they were clean and gleaming. My teeth are large as tombstones, and it's as well to keep them in good order because they're noticeable. It occurred to me that I had found a new face, and I wondered how it would speak. It spoke in a clear, clipped, educated manner, and what it said was crisp and to the point. She's still my favourite character in my gallery of monstrous women, the wife of an Oxbridge vice-chancellor.
We've been talking about her virtue and her goodness and her lack of malice to some extent. I don't agree about the lack of malice. I think all her work is shot through with malice. Did you, as a friend of hers, pick up the anger or the contempt?
Not so much contempt. Certainly we knew that we had to brush our hair and polish our shoes before we went to visit her.
It was conditional.
It was. And I remember her telling my older sister off, who at 21 had loose hair, and Joyce said, "I think, Rachel, you'll find it's time you put your hair up."
Oh, dear.
And she didn't really believe in teenagers. She believed in children and adults. And teenagers were just misbehaving and ought to learn to respect their parents in the way that she'd respected her parents.
How did you feel, Janie, when you were reading Joyce's diaries for your biography of her and you came across her comments about you in 1974? "I was saddened by Janie's whole stubborn attitude. She's a bit of a slut and has lost her looks." How does that feel for a biographer to read?
I was pretty shocked because only an hour before I'd read a letter from her to a mutual friend saying what a sweet little girl I was. That was when I was about 12. When she describes me there, I was about 20 and my skirts were too short and I wasn't looking how I ought to have. I went off to the pub and I had a pint and I thought, well, never mind, I'm writing this book and it teaches me what she felt about teenagers in general. So there's something to learn from that.
Well, for the benefit of our radio audience, if you ever did lose your looks, you've regained them.
Thank you.
Why did she not have children?
Just didn't happen. Not having children was certainly not a choice, and she was very, very sad for 20 years that she didn't have children. And even in her 40s, she had dreams that she was pregnant and wondered if it might happen. And it did distress her terribly that all her sisters-in-law kept having children and her friends. Once she got into her 50s, she sort of said, well, actually, I wouldn't have been able to do any of the things I did do, but I'd quite like to have had grandchildren.
She might not have done as much if she'd had children.
She wouldn't have done anything.
I think it was, Janie, towards the end of her career, when she got cancer, she only accepted painkillers at the very end, didn't she?
She survived 7 years with absolutely no treatment at all. And when Reggie finally said, look, you've just got to go and see a doctor, and there's a sort of let out in Christian Science that if you do have to go and see a doctor, you can, but it must be the best. So she went off to a Harley Street specialist. And he said to me, I cannot believe this woman survived that long. Most people would have been on morphine for 7 years.
Gosh.
Do you think, Arabella, that her work is timeless, enduring, or is it of its time?
Both, in a way. I think it's very, very to me, evocative of a certain time, but I think it is also timeless.
My thanks to Arabella Weir, who chose this week's Great Life, that of Joyce Grenfell, and to Janie Hampton, our expert witness. Goodbye.